happened. And this is what is happening here in Kenya. This man spoke under spiritual power of seduction into the souls of hundreds of people. The police are digging up hundreds of bodies in Kenya right now. At the time I posted, the death toll was 73. It has now surpassed 100. And now a second pastor by the name of Ezekiel Odoro, God told me to say his name, Ezekiel Odoro, who styles himself almost like the second Jesus. This man has been pulling crowds of 50,000. Crowds of 50,000. Those are Super Bowl numbers. But in Africa, in one nation and from surrounding nations, people have been coming to see this self-styled pastor, this self-proclaimed pastor that has now just been arrested for mass killing of his church members. This is where we are. And Pastor Bob and Sister Hendricks is not telling the United States that she is next. Mass killing of church members. Isolating people out in the wilderness so that concerned family members, so that concerned friends, please excuse the noise, I'm not going to stop. Concerned family members, concerned friends, concerned colleagues will not be able to reach the deluded people to ask, is this what Jesus told you? Please show me the Bible verse where he says, starve yourself to death so that you can get a jump start on the rapture in a different format. God gave a word for President William Ruto of Kenya, and he said to tell President William Ruto, you will have a storm on your hands. He said to tell him, you will have more than you can handle because of my judgments coming against Kenya for apostasy and false prophets. The leader of a nation is the steward of that nation. The leader of a nation is supposed to be the person who watches out for everything under his care. But in Kenya, a nation that has always been known to serve God, a nation of worshipers, the rot, the fungus of apostasy has crept in. And I gave the difference between being a reprobate and being apostate. Reprobate simply means that you are one who is so given over to sin that you are almost unable to be rehabilitated. But an apostate is different. To be called apostate, you must have known Jesus previously. You cannot be accused of apostasy if there has been no revolution of salvation and the entry of the gospel in you. Japan can never be called an apostate nation because Japan has never had a revolution of the gospel of Jesus Christ. They have between 1 to 3% Christians, which is negligible numbers, next to nobody, just a few families scattered here and there. Kenya, like America, styles itself as a Christian nation, but God says that he is going to judge Kenya for apostasy and for false prophets. I hope that the nation of the United States is listening, because every time I bring the false prophet messages here, people think that God is only mildly irritated, even though I have taught in depth about how the entry of false prophets into the water supply of the gospel of Jesus Christ in a nation is literally like pouring sulfuric acid into the place where all the animals come and drink. They will be poisoned and their carcasses will hit the ground. And now here is a live example of the kind of damage that false prophets can do. News reports saying that entire families, an entire family of 7 people found in one grave in Kenya. Who do you think put them there? The so-called pastor and his burial henchmen, because he didn't dig all those holes alone. He didn't bury all those people alone. He had help. God said that Mr. Ruto is a good man, but he is going to have a storm on his hands and more than he can handle, because God says he's going to judge Kenya for falling away from the gospel and for giving her ear to false prophets. Kenya is going to have drought, and she is also going to have famine. And I hope we can understand that famine is the natural outflow of a drought. A drought is a curse from God, biblically. When the land sins against God and when the people depart from the true worship of God, he always sends drought as a punishment. Think Elijah and the 3 years he took rain from Israel until their animals were dying and people were going hungry. That is why King Ahab called him the troubler of Israel. You trouble a land when you mess with the food supply, and then people begin to go hungry. Famine is not just we haven't had much crops. Famine is when people begin to starve. God says there won't be food to eat because the people are eating and drinking with false gods and idols. He says William Ruto is a good man, but he says this man has bitten off more than he can chew. He will be grappling with political instability in his cabinet members, and he will also face public backlash for the string of economic woes that are coming. So Kenya is not only going to experience hunger and drought, but God says that there will also be political instability. And this is a prophecy that has gone out against many nations since 2019. God saying that he will shake many nations and that many leaders will be simply tumbled out of their space of leadership. I brought the prophecy here where I said that God says that some leaders are going to be killed by mass action in their countries, and other leaders are literally going to have to get into the presidential car or in an unmarked car and run for the borders or run for the airport to save their lives. Mr. Ruto has bitten off more than he can chew, and he will soon be facing political instability among his cabinet members, and he will also face public backlash because of the string of economic woes that are coming. This is the entry of the struggles of the black horse into Kenya. All in all, tell Mr. Ruto that he will be governing a very different Kenya than the one his predecessors left him. So whoever were the previous presidents and whatever kind of season and era they had, if it was a great era or an easier era, God says that Mr. Ruto will be left with a very different Kenya than the Kenya that previous presidents left him. The Lord says, Kenya left me to worship with false gods in the wilderness. That is apostasy. When a nation departs from the ever-living God to worship idols, she will become the victim of what those idols can do. And this is what always happened to Israel. The Lord said in, I think it was Jeremiah, he said, ask in